Well, good afternoon. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on unlocking scale through the digitization of investor management. Private capital has always been a convoluted and complex area of investment. And today, we'll be discussing some of the problems of the past, current changes in the marketplace, and what the future of scalable investor management will look like. Our aim today here is to get you thinking about your current processes and to start thinking about new ideas on how your business can scale its investor management operations. I'm Alex Green, co-founder and chief evangelist at Globacap. We've digitized and automated the underlying processes behind capital, enabling a suite of tools to help you better engage and manage your investor network. Alongside myself today, I have Roxanne Combe from IQ-EQ and Oscar Deputelli from DXA Invest. Thank you to both of you for your time today. Roxanne is Director of Funds at IQ-EQ and Oscar is a CEO and founder of DXA Invest.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity for us to discuss a little bit of, I think, of this kind of worldwide transformation around private markets. We are a piece of that transformation as we are based out of Brazil and focus in LATAM investments. Our firm, we are a traditional manager. We've been in the market since 1997, and about 2 years ago, our firm turned into a fintech to allow basically investors globally to have access to investments here in the region, while they have our team's about 50 people nowadays. And I believe that this transformation on privates is something that's here to stay, and probably the next 10, 20 years is going to be completely different than what we have anticipated. But our journey has become, as a tech side, to investments that we were leading, and now became basically a hub for all sorts of different strategies with other managers also. But we'll discuss a little bit more along our conversation here. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Oscar. Roxanne, please, if you could run through IQ-EQ.
Sure, thank you, Alex. IQ-EQ, we're an investor services specialist. We've been going around for several decades, but as a name, IQ-EQ, we only came out in 2019 as we joined forces between several companies. So 2019 was when the IQ-EQ name was launched. So when I say we're an investor services specialist, we offer a comprehensive range of compliance, administration, asset, and advisory services. We work at a global scale. As you can see, we operate from 24 different locations, mostly in Europe where we came from, but we have expanded very much across the globe, in the US with various acquisitions. We are in Asia, in Africa, across the globe very much, thanks to these 24 locations. So globally, 4,000 people. You can see that our expertise is very much in various assets of the financial industry. We help managers within the private equity space, the real estate or infrastructure, digital assets as well, which makes a lot of sense, and credit. So there is a comprehensive range of services for those investors, in particular for these asset managers. The services are very much from end to end. So from the early stage up to the complete, from the investor level. So from the initiation of capital, the raising of capital, the investment level, and then the reporting to investors and divestment of those capital to investors. So I've personally been in this space for 12 years, working for the firm for 12 years. And prior to that, I was in the technology space selling to fund managers as well. So very much a financial services professional for 15 years now.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Roxanne and Oscar, for your introductions. And again, glad to have you with us. At Globacap, we offer a suite of tools that help investment managers scale their businesses. Our digital ecosystem now has over 14 billion of securities. That comprises the market value of equity and debt of almost 100 private companies and asset managers that use our digital ecosystem to administer their securities and also engage with their investors. So these companies and asset managers have used our platform to execute over 35 primary placements. We have many more live right now on the platform. The third component and pillar of our ecosystem is liquidity, and within a secondary liquidity context, we went live at the end of last year. Year to date, we've already executed over 180 million of secondary market transactions in private assets on our platform, and all of that is with full automated settlement. So we now have 3 white labels at a global institutional level. One of those includes the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. We were founded in 2017, and we are FCA regulated as in a range of investments and transactions, and we're also a custodian. So we can move on to the next slide. So here, let's kick it off. We're going to talk about investor management's role in scaling. So in today's competitive environment, using an investor management tool can have a major impact on the success of a business, keeping up with investors' evolving expectations and needs on how to receive and interpret information. So that's from initial outreach all the way through to the ongoing administration that's associated with those investments. Roxanne, I'd like to start with you perhaps, and you could talk about, in your view, what are the benefits of having a solid investor management strategy in place, and at the same time, maybe what are the trends that you see they're driving the need for these investor CRMs?
Yes, thanks, Alex. I think to answer this question, there's a couple of considerations to take into account. First of all, we are evolving in a market where regulation is making a big portion of our decisions, right? It's a big portion of how you communicate to these investors. So I think regulation is something that's driving a lot of the trends as a priority. Why is this regulation important? Is because the way that you're going to interact with investors when you market to them are going to be driven by regulation. Are you allowed to in these jurisdictions? And the way you're going to then report to these investors and communicate to the investors are going to be very much on the lookout. It's going to be observed. I think what are the trends in order to address these? And your question was about having a solid investor management strategy in place. The trends that I see is that a lot of companies, small or large, they often function in silos. They often function in silos with different departments having access to a certain data, and then other departments having access to other data, but not having a single platform to very much have that shared information, which I think is one of the trends at the moment, that companies realize we want to have this single access of data. We want to have this single point of truth. And the single point of truth is coming quite often. So in terms of the trends, it's undeniable that this single platform is something that we see a lot of managers when looking at the investor management strategy, they are looking into that. So the reason for that single platform is to get access to better control of their data, just to have availability of that data. And all that undeniably is for better decision making. So I would say the trends are very much around those lines of regulations, making sure you're evolving the right environment, but also having access across the company to the same level of data.
Oh, thanks very much, Roxanne. Interesting viewpoint. Oscar, perhaps if you want, you can share on the same topic, but I had a slightly different question for you. And here is, how do you think about scaling your operation in terms of that investor engagement and investor management aspect of
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what Roxanne was mentioning about regulation, because I do believe that the trend that we're seeing globally is easier access to the masses to invest in privates, right? And I think it's interesting. We saw from Jobs Act, Regulation CF, and all sorts of other regulations around the world that were similar in terms of mentality. At the same time, I think when we look in regards to a long period of investments, private markets have outpaced the stock exchange, right? So you look at a 20-year investment in the S&P versus that whole Cambridge private equity index is almost like 3x. So I do believe that what used to be something very close to the ultra wealthy, now it's there's regulation that allows you to have a closer contact to these smaller investors. However, the technology in order to manage that, the technology in order to control that in the right way is still very incumbent. So I think that's kind of where we're discussing here, how you do need the technology in order to be able to scale. In our case specifically here, we are in a region in the world that's receiving a lot of capital. Latin America has become the premier destination for venture-backed investments. However, they're still in the hands of a small handle, like 30, 40 different very large funds. That's not accessible to an individual that wants to have a specific investment. I think another trend that we're seeing is the growth of direct investments versus the growth of fund investments. So people in general, they want to have a connection to that specific investment they want to do. And what we're starting to see a lot was the growth of these either crowdfunding platforms or ways that the individual are simply kind of shown companies. That's normally for people that are working for the companies, right? We started to see that there was a very small number of investment management companies that were actually without a conflict of interest, looking at these opportunities to allow the smaller investors to come on board. So I think, like a long story short here, I think what Roxanne is saying in terms of regulation evolution, I think in terms of having a investor management in this role of scaling, because you're now dealing with smaller checks and a bigger number and growing bigger number of different investors. So you do need a kind of technology to allow you to control it.
So is it fair to say that it sounds like you're using these tools, or your approach here is allowing you to create different types of vehicles, or also engage with different investors, not only those larger institutional investors, but then also smaller retail investors, as well as being able to manage those vehicles, because it sounds like a lot of your back office admin needs would be then kind of handled.
Yeah, for sure. I think we need to think from a technology standpoint on all sorts of different areas of the firm, from the back office to the IR side to the kind of risk management side. All of that needs to be connected. And for us, we believe that our goal is to be able to have investors from around the world. So I think that's really part of the relationship we've built with GlobalCap to allow us to have such kind of tools to think outside of the box of the traditional kind of having very big investors only coming on board on our investment vehicles.
Excellent, great, thanks. I think that this is a perfect segue into the next slide here, where we're going to talk about like the importance of investor management and today's issues that are faced. And then, Roxanne, you touched on the regulatory side, which is always incredibly important, right? From us as a business, we want to make sure that we're constantly regulatory compliant. As you're engaging with more clients, as Oscar said, well, then you start to kind of increase that burden. There's several important stages of that investor engagement life cycle during an investment process. Your slide kind of touched on it. So the same 4 points are kind of like that onboarding. So both from a regulatory as well as an administrative point of view, keeping up with the requirements, not only of the regulator, but then of also your internal firm's kind of compliance checks. Then there's that investor engagement. So during a placement, maybe some of what Oscar's talked about, but you also facilitate some of that, Roxanne, and you've worked there. And then settlement issuance, processing, documentation, but then there's that ongoing administrative need. So I think, Roxanne, let's start again with you here. In your views, what are some of the issues faced at each of those stages? Which are the ones that are most relevant to you? Is there just one that's the most important, or perhaps you can just shed some light on where you're seeing the difficulty right now or in general.
Thanks, Alex. I think it's a really important question. The different stages of the process, you get different challenges with the investment management. So I think Oscar will have a really clear experience on that. My experience in particular is with professional investors. So it's true that the processes that would have the most experience will be much more strict in terms of what are the requirements in terms of KYC. My first thought about this, what is the important stages? KYC is the first one where you onboard a client, and in the retail space, I think it's a different there's a different angle compared to for professional investors where you go through various stages of checks and the KYC process to me is the first one. It's the first stage where you see you can get a challenge. There's a lot to be said about that. So there's a lot to be improved as well in terms of our processes, how we approach KYC, how do we tackle KYC with the right technology. I think these are the kind of question, and I'm pretty sure Oscar will have a different perspective from the retail investors perspective. From our end, having gone through a lot of those onboarding with investors, it's true that the manual KYC process doesn't work anymore. The investors are used to using their phone to have face recognition, to put their ID, take a picture of the ID, and they don't want to have to go to the notary to have an ID certified because now we have the right technology. So these are the kind of improvement that I believe the industry would need in terms of investor experience. And then I think one of the other angle that I would stress on, and again, there's so many in terms of investor management, but it's the communication, it's the transparency with those investors. Why are all those regulations coming on? Why is the regulatory market so buoyant at the moment? It's because investors are expecting more protection. They're expecting more transparency from their investment manager, their portfolio. So that transparency, that reporting capability, there's still a lot of disparities in the market as to how investors are getting reported to, how they are getting communicated to. Today, it's true that a CRM platform, an online data room, it's not a nice to have anymore. It's something that you would expect when you invest in a portfolio, in a fund, in an asset manager, whatever the investment, you're expecting transparency on the reporting. So I think these are the areas where I would stress that there's still room to improve.
I think it's quite interesting what you were saying in regards to, well, first of all, on the KYC side, right? And it's in our case here, we have smaller investors, but we have big investors also that have their own vehicles and all of that. And what we found out was that even the larger investors, they are preferring the tech-enabled KYC process also, right? Still kind of a working from home type of strategy. Maybe they're not going to the office, and but I think more and more of these tech advanced adoption, and it's interesting how I think we've been able to try to adapt the kind of a old traditional structure to the new process. We ended up even with GlobalCap here creating a new product to allow KYC to be invested into a Cayman vehicle, for instance, things that weren't kind of very traditional you would think in the past. But I do think that the market has a lot of these new SPV from the structure, like you go to a supermarket that you buy any kind of SPV very quick and everything. And I think that from our end, we're seeing two paths here: a path of very how can I say, simple, or at least not that much heavily regulated type of SPVs or structures, just to allow a small group of people, and that's disconnected to the more professional investors. And I think whoever tries to do, which is one of the things that we're trying to do, and I think GlobalCap is doing that, is to be able to connect those two, right, have structures that allow the smaller investors and allows also the more professional ones. And I think what you were saying in regards to KYC is spot on that.
Excellent. Well, thanks to both of you there. And it sounds like Oscar, you've definitely gained, I know, some insight into the way your company operates, but yet you've been able to not go to those off-the-shelf products and actually design the vehicle that suited your specific investors' needs to grow and scale your business. Yeah, so I think that is important. But we could spend time on every one of these 4 areas because the needs, I think, are broad and rather deep. No matter whether you are a large fund or engaging with professional investors, as Roxanne mentioned, or all the way down to base retail. I think the pain points are the same throughout.
Because you touch into a point of secondaries, right? So if we have the right structure in place that you can connect into the same, let's say, deal or in the same investment, small investors and the professional ones, that's really where you can get potential liquidity better in the future, because you can potentially switch a ownership from a professional investor to a smaller one and vice versa, right? So I think if we want to see a more of a liquidity aspect into the private markets, we need to think about those structures.
We'll touch on that in a couple of slides here. I think in the next slide, we talked a little bit about adoption. Roxanne, you touched on that, and let's talk about where the industry currently stands and the trends that we're seeing that are driving this need for the investor CRMs a little bit deeper. Roxanne, perhaps in your view, so it sounds like you think there is a lack of investor management strategy, or at least use of technology or innovation in the market. So which segments are you seeing investor management tools being deployed, or where are you guys engaging the most? Is that onboarding? Is that through the distribution process? Is it regulatory compliance aspects of it?
I don't know if there's a lack of investor management, but more, I would say there is more disparities, and that's where I think that's how you recognize that a market is evolving, right? When you see that there are the managers where they would have investor management at the top of their agenda, you would have some who would just continue operate the same way that they always did. I think the landscape of where we are now, and it's quite clear from the regulation, the pressure from investors. I think there is a clear need to improve, and there's a lot of new technologies coming up. What I do think is that whilst a technology is licensing a technology is an ideal solution, it might not be ideal for each and every member of the spectrum of the financial industry. A smaller manager may not find their way with licensing a technology, hiring the team behind them, because they just don't have the means, they just don't have the priority to that. So having solutions like GlobalCap, having solutions like what we offer with IQEQ is something that is coming up like more on the market at the moment, where you don't just license a technology and you hire the people, but you actually use a service. So it's using a service that is changing and framing the market in a different way. Right. So yes, I know it sounds quite dramatic when I say there are so many disparities, but I think it's for the best of it. It's for the positive, because we are moving in the right direction, and there are options, there are new solutions coming out to help the smaller managers, or the ones who just can't prioritize on building their own solutions internally.
Sure, thanks. Oscar, maybe you can touch on the same, but then also if you could expand a little bit more on how you guys manage your process currently, and then and how you moved. What made you modify, or what made you kind of pivot and go? You're one of the more innovative funds that we've met.
Yeah, well, I think I think to give a bit of an overview of what the market stands also. So in 2020, there was about $30 billion of private market deals that were traded online. 30 billion in the US. And about 26 billion of that was secondaries. So you have to think that there's something that's happening with these more tech-enabled companies, that their employees are kind of selling their shares, or they need to do some sort of a kind of buy a house, or use that as an alternative. And I think
Sure.
that we're seeing that trend is going to go nowhere. We're never going back. So when we look in terms of where the market is going, we want to make sure that at least for Latin America, we have 50 people on the ground, that we can be that access for investors. And I think there was one of the questions here that was asking about these tech enable other applications in our day-to-day basis. And today is very easy for you to know an information that's going on around the world. You get on your phone and you're able to see it either through a web, or even through things like communications like WhatsApp, for instance, right? So I think we need to embed all of that into our day-to-day basis as an investment manager. I'm always saying that we, as investment, private equity and venture capital investors, we're investing into innovative companies. But most of us have not done any innovation into our businesses, right? Still raise capital in a traditional way. You still kind of raise that 10-year fund. But then we started to figure out is that if we bring that technology into our day-to-day basis, it changes the whole business. So our team, for instance, our investment team, continues to do the same thing as it used to do in the past. It's going to select companies, it's going to find good companies to invest in, but through the technology, we allow each investor to have their own portfolio. So maybe we're investing 10 companies on a year. Maybe Roxanne has 3 of it. Alex might buy a company that we invested last year on a secondary from somebody. So I think that's the future where the market is going. And I think as investment managers, it's very hard for us to develop everything by ourselves. So I think we need that kind of connectivity with platforms that are regulated and tech enabled to allow us to change the business into that.
Because I was going
Roxanne,
to jump on that. It makes a lot of sense, Oscar. But none of this would be possible without technology.
No,
It
impossible.
just wouldn't.
yeah.
The effort, it would take I don't know, thousands of spreadsheets to make it happen. So
Yeah.
it's clear that there's a shift. There's a shift by tech-enabled businesses to work smarter and invest smarter for the investor community.
You have the whole community aspect. People want to, um, when they come into an Uber, they want to check what was the rating of the driver, right? So you have that whole aspect of who's investing into this, why are they investing, this whole engagement, and especially now with the millennials being a lot in the forefront of wealth management. Wealth tech in the future is going to be focused on personalization and digital private assets being traded online. Either if that's a uh, uh, a digital token that was created for that specific deal, or if it's a straight kind of a digital KYC that you're doing in order to be able to invest into that specific investment managed portfolio.
So I think this is great because it sounds to me like both of you. So Oscar, have you seen a competitive advantage now, or you're seeking that competitive advantage by using technology and deploying technology across your business? Would that be fair comment? And then
For sure. I think, Alex, it's been very interesting to how we've seen kind of open up our minds, because now we are able to even to connect to other fintechs around the world and to say, hey, you want to invest in Latin America? We have the tech aspect of it to allow you to do it. So, and it's interesting how you guys have this ability to receive capital from 50, 54, 55 different countries, right? And that allows us to be talking to guys from anywhere in the world and say, hey, you can simply plug our tech. And I think to Roxanne's point, transparency, right? So the more we can be online with our information, the more transparent we are going to be able to offer this to investors and to partners also.
Excellent. Moving over to the next slide, and I think it's a continuation of this topic. Roxanne, you touched on it before, whether you are just providing a software as a service or a platform as a service. Certainly from our side, we find that many investors continue to manage things traditionally, that old way. I mean, even some of them paper, mailing out certificates, whether those be bond certificates or share certificates, and I don't want to say invest. Of course, there's very innovative companies, but there's also a huge segment of them that are using kind of like a mix mash of tools that make that process somewhat complex, at least from a user experience point of view. So it's not that one vertical that you talked about. So, in your view, what's holding back these issuers from adopting or incorporating these more innovative solutions? And everybody from the large guy down to the smaller guy. Is it the educational aspect of it? Are we talking about convincing? Is it the investor side that needs to be convinced? Are there internal stakeholders that need to be convinced? So, what do you see as kind of like that holding that back, or where we are on that adoption curve?
Well, if I well, maybe share some experience of clients who approach us, I would say almost the entirety they use Excel quite a lot. They use Excel whether they outsource their services or they have everything in-house. Excel is still a big part of their daily routine. I think Excel is a very powerful tool, and it's going to be really hard to replace it. I don't think there's even a plan. There's even a gist to replace Excel. It's a fantastic tool. So it's just these tools are never going to be replaced, I believe, but it's just adding a layer of control of the data and security of the data around it. What's holding back, if anything, it's sometimes the fear of a large project, I would say, of a large and lengthy project involving a lot of parties. Sometimes the cost, I mean, when you are buying technology yourself, cost can be an issue. I think it's getting different when you're talking about software, some service solutions. But I'm just if I give you an example, one of my recent clients, they have been using outsourced providers for many years. They were not entirely happy with the outsourced provider they were using. So they were doing everything. They were shadowing everything that the provider was doing so they were shadowing on Excel. Excel is a big part of their life, because it allows them to make sure that the numbers they receive from their provider are right, and that they can issue the communication to the investors. What's been key to them having discussions, it's been the view of their portfolio, being able to view their portfolio outside of Excel, but with some very smart graphs. Today, you can have very powerful solutions like data visualization. I'm not going to name them, but there are some very, very good technologies that allow you to drill down and just make it dynamic. That was a key decision maker, and then that the possibility to implement a solution that will not necessarily replace Excel, but feed into that Excel to be more accurate in terms of data. I think this is something that has tremendously helped. And when they realize the budget, in terms of the budget, and the fact that they wouldn't have to go through the whole process themselves of implementation, data migration, and tailoring of the platform, that's what they really liked compared to purchasing a technology. So sometimes the fears are not well placed, if I may say, and it doesn't take much to really make a manager understand that they should be moving on to a different solution.
One point that you talked about that we haven't addressed yet is that data integrity. that comes out as a result of what you're delivering and using these tools? I know Oscar's been,
And
a fan of
GDPR,
data
this
integrity.
whole, yeah. I think that Excel's proven that's a lot weaker than when you have the information on a secure site, right? So I think that's also a big issue. People are not discussing as much as they should.
And I think in terms of data integrity, you can't avoid thinking about also the security of how you convey that data to the investors. In the private funds world, it's not going to come as a surprise that there's been huge cases of drawdown impersonations in instances where a manager doesn't use any technology or any hosted platform. The hackers are just getting their hands on template drawdown. They impersonate the investor to the manager, who then makes the transfer. There are some really serious technologies around that to protect the investors, and very much part of investor management. But the security is a really big issue.
So, Oscar, if you can just touch on another aspect of some of the things that Roxanne mentioned there, from your personal experience at DXA. Certainly enhancement of processes. You already touched on that. You even mentioned your team doesn't do anything differently. You just use technology to enhance your sales and distribution strategy, managing some aspects. Onboarding pain, or that perceived fear, Roxanne, of that onboarding pain of onboarding a new tool or service, and then the costs associated with it. So what's been your experience, Oscar? So everything from rolling out this kind of end-to-end digital solution that you've seen. So everything from, even if you could touch on also your investors. What was that road like, or the engagement and adoption from them? So everything from enhancing your processes to then the investor engagement, if you would.
I think that most of the time it's easier said than done on that aspect. I feel that the investors who are the more traditional, professional investors, they're used to do things the old way. They're harder to adopt this new technology. The younger ones are a lot easier. So I think that in our case, we've started with a solution with GlobalCap where everybody would go through GlobalCap's website to do it. There were some investors that had the challenge of feeling, oh, I'm leaving the DXA's environment in order to do that. And then now we moved towards a completely white label solution where people don't feel they're leaving our environment in order to do that. But from a regulatory standpoint, they're actually doing it into GlobalCap's structure. So it's been, I think, overall very good adoption and a very, very good acceptance. But yes, who's been used to do the traditional way still feels, oh, but why am I doing this? And I think that the world's going towards this technology and towards this whole path. So they understand that they need to adapt also. So it's been quite positive adoption.
Excellent. I think we'll move into the last component here, the slide before we move into Q&A. So what's ahead? What's on the roadmap here for investor management? And we kind of segued into that actually quite nicely here. Oscar, where do you see the industry heading? Do you see others migrating like you guys have very quickly and really embracing technology from an end-to-end deal management and investor management solution?
I think we're at the beginning of this whole path. I feel like we're just starting off. And when it all starts with who has the money, right? The investor. And what's happening with that investor in the wealth management side, right? Or now more and more the word wealth tech, it's been a reality, right? And I've seen interesting cases like Wealthfront Betterment being acquired by UBS, or guys like Finimize being acquired by Aberdeen. So you're starting to see this whole path towards robo-advisor and towards a digital a conversation with your investors. So I think that for us in the private market, we need to make sure that all the data related to our investments are available for maybe one day it's an artificial intelligence that's building your portfolio, Alex, and it's saying you should have this specific company that's invested in the Exchange portfolio. So we need to understand that we are part of where the world is going. We need to make sure that our data is available and that we are compiling this and allowing this whole kind of global community to use it.
Excellent. And then Roxanne, so similar on your side, where do you see the industry heading in terms of managing processes, and touch on mass adoption, please. When does that happen, of these, taking some of these traditional processes where you can and just digitizing them?
I completely agree. I think what Oscar was saying, that's where I see the industry going. Digitalization is obviously it's a hot topic. I can't count how many seminars and conferences I've done on data and access to data, and how do you build your company to share this data. I think the industry is going to more of those apps, like the iPhone availability, being able to having access to your portfolio, to your exposure, doing your KYC on your phone. It's just the accessibility and being able to perform those tasks or those checks remotely. I think COVID probably has changed a lot our habits, and has changed the market in some ways. We remember the days where large institutional investors wouldn't invest in a fund without having met the team in person. Those days, I don't know if they are coming back, but they're long behind now. Most investors are quite comfortable meeting via Teams and Zoom and whatever means the manager is using. So there has been a shift in habits, and especially in terms of investor management. I think this is very much going into the app type of functionality, being able to monitor everything from your phone or from a tablet and on the go. So
excellent. So yeah, Oscar, we don't have AI yet, but we have IA, intelligent automation. So we'll work on the AI aspect of it for you. But certainly, Roxanne, interesting point. We certainly experienced that kind of adoption curve. I mean, our company grew from 18 employees to 63 over that period of COVID. More clients came to us because realizing, well, they couldn't do things anymore because they weren't in the same room and they needed a digital platform.
And it's just the beginning, I believe. It's just the beginning. The next 10 years are going to be completely shift towards this, for you to be able to allow personalization in portfolios. And I believe that us in the industry, we need to make sure that we are connected to the tech and to the regulation. And I think that's where you guys play a very important role.
Cool. We have a couple questions real quickly, and we're pretty much up on time, but let's go for a couple questions here. So do you think the advancements in tech across other aspects of our day-to-day lives have changed expectations in investment tech? For example, online and digital banking. So I think, Roxanne, you just pretty much touched on that, but yeah, if you guys want to give your views, both of you, quickly.
I'd say in regards to social recognition and analysis of a manager, you have to think that in the future you'll have points that analyze this guy is a good manager or not. That's going to be related, like I mentioned about Uber. But also, I think to be able to wire money instantly. So we'd be able to use either if it's through blockchain, digital assets, tokens. But I do believe that that's going to be two very important aspects. It's like a manager due diligence, and also like a payments and transfer globally instantly.
Roxanne, any views real quickly on it?
Yeah, I think there's a clear appetite. Things are shifting. We know that banks are. If you look at the digital banks, for instance, we know it's not coming as a surprise to anyone, but banks are being really challenging at the moment. The regular classic bank that you would think of, they're becoming challenging because opening bank accounts is taking much longer, and we see a shift in terms of the asset management, the fund industry. They are shifting towards the EMI banking options, the online banking, the Revolut of this world, or the Alpha FX. So we do see a trend. It's still, to my knowledge, it's still not fully confirmed with the regulators whether they are comfortable with that. But I think it's not going to take much time before we hear an opinion that things are being accepted. So clearly the digital aspect of the next stage for the financial industry is there. We're just plunging into it.
Thanks. Another interesting question. So, Oscar, you touched on digital securities. So, do you think digitizing of securities will lead to easier secondaries that get private investments closer to kind of public market levels or transactions?
Oh, for sure. That's the future is a market where you'll be seeing a lot of trades going on the private markets in several different exchanges, and it's going to feel very similar to the public markets. I believe that even the private deals are going to be very similar to the private markets, trading in all sorts of different exchanges.
We have one more question here because we're on time, but for both you and Roxanne, maybe you could start off. So, from your side, who has the most impact on innovation and change? Is it the issuer, the manager, is it investor led, and who's creating the demand for innovation?
I think it's the investors. I think it's a slow mover, but it's the investors' demand that create the need for more progress on innovation. That's my perspective, because when you think about the recent needs for ESG transparency to just prove to your investors how you invest responsibly, having access to that data without a technology, it's barely impossible. You just can't have access to that data. You have to go through different processes. It's a very lengthy process. I think everything that we're going towards in the financial industry is driven by the investor requests. I might be wrong, but that's my impression.
That's fine.
Yeah, I believe so. It's like that whole who holds the gold rules, right? And I think it's always been that way. So I think we're seeing definitely the millennials being now the wealthiest generation. It's going to change a lot what our landscape is.
Excellent. Well, look, we're wrapping it up here, and thank you very much for both of you for your time today. Really appreciate it, Oscar and Roxanne. We hope that everybody has found the event highly useful, and you go away with something that's beneficial to you. Some things that you guys have talked about is that need for innovation that actually drives data integrity, and as a result of that data integrity and distributing that and embracing those investors more, you can get more transactions and more deal volume done, which allows efficiency gains. So it's really interesting. Future investment management shaping up and drastically going to shift the way that the market operates. So we're very happy to be participating in that and be on the forefront of this change. So again, thank you for joining the webinar. We have organized multiple webinars for this year based on topics around the future of institutional investment operations. So if you're interested, please make sure to subscribe to our LinkedIn page for updates. We look forward to seeing you guys in the next event. Again, Roxanne, thank you so much for your participation. Oscar, thanks very much. And
pleasure.
You guys have a great day.
Thank you for having us.